In this video, I'm going to give you an entire Major League Baseball sports betting top-down model, which means there's no stat model involved, no statistics. It's 100% driven by line movement. In addition to that, we're going to do a very good teaching session on understanding line movement, and hopefully you'll get a ton of value in this video. Before we dive into that, do want to mention today is Friday, June the 3rd. If you follow me on Instagram, MGCovers, cover spelled with a Z, I give out all my lines for all sports, which right now is soccer and Major League Baseball. Of course, in the fall, we'll have football, NHL, basketball, etc. So every Friday, I give out all my lines on Instagram for free. So if you follow me, there's a link in the description of this video. You get a ton of value simply by following me on Instagram. Super excited about this video. So let's dive into it now. Okay, so the first page that we're going to pull up, first screen we're going to look at, we have to do some education about line movement, opening line, closing line value, etc. The game we're going to look at, this was from yesterday. Now the site that I am at bookmakersreview.com. You spell it just like that, bookmakersreview.com. This was from yesterday, and we're going to look at the Texas-Minnesota game. Now you see where it says opener. This is what we call the opening line. Now, what they do on this website, they take, if you look at all these sports books, which all of these are offshore books, you have Bet Online, Bovada, Bookmaker, which are probably the most popular. There's also Pinnacle in this as well. They just don't show it up here. So what they do with the opening line, they take the opening lines of all these books and average them together to get what I call a generic opening line. And that's going to be important to understand that opening line and why it's better to look at that as opposed to a sharp book like, say, Circa Sports or Pinnacle. And we'll get into that in just a second. So the opening line for this particular game was plus 145. Now, let's look at Bookmaker's closing line. Bookmaker is I would consider Bookmaker a sharp book. They take a ton of action. They take a lot of big money, so we will label them a sharp book. I wouldn't say they're as sharp as Circa or Pinnacle, but when I show you the tracker at the end of this, you'll be able to see that it's legit and works handicapping this way. So the line opens at plus 145 and it closes at plus 132. So the line movement is moving in the direction of Texas. Now, let's look at Minnesota. So it opens for Minnesota at minus 160, and then the line closes at minus 146. So it's moving away from Minnesota. If it was moving in favor of Minnesota, it would have closed at maybe minus 165, minus 166. An example of it moving in favor of the favorite, take a look at Detroit and Baltimore. Line opened at just below that. Line opened at minus 170. It closed at minus 190. Now, Texas opens at plus 145, closes at plus 132. The trigger point for this top-down concept will be we're going to look at underdogs only. I'll explain that later as well, where the line opens and where it closes with at least a 10-cent move. And that's just what old school guys called it, a 10-cent move, meaning here plus 145 minus 132 is actually 13 cents. So the trigger point would be if the line closes at 10 cents or greater from the opening line here. So in order for this to be a play, this line would close at plus 135. If it closed at plus 138, it would not be a play. So we had a 13-cent line movement, and this would be considered a play. Now, this is very important because a lot of people say, well, this isn't a sharp opening line. The reason you want to look at the generic line here as opposed to a sharp book like Pinnacle, like Circa, will open the line at a better number. And if they open it at a better number, it can make it more difficult to see the difference between the opening and closing line. And let me show you that as well. So now we switch over here and I'm at BetStamp. This is a great app, by the way, and they show a Pinnacle line movement. And look at the opening line for Texas at Pinnacle. It opened at plus 143. And if you go back and remember, the generic line for Texas was plus 145. So we want to look at the opening line of the generic book so that it's easier to see the dispersion between the opening line and the closing line. Okay, let's take a look at another example. Washington opened at plus 208. It closed at plus 179. So that was a significant move. It was greater. It was 10 cents or greater. So that would be a play for Washington, even though it was a loss. Now, so there's two examples. Now, I do want to mention this. This is very important. You will often hear in the sports betting community something called closing line value. That means the number that you played versus when that number closed. It's the percentage difference. So for example, if you played this line at plus 145 and it closes at plus 132, I want to show you what your closing line would be. So the line opened at 145, you played it at 145. Hypothetically, it closes at 132. So we would take the little number divided by the big number. We get 0.91, and to convert that, and then you just take 0.91 minus 1, and you get 8%. So the closing line value, if you played it at plus 145, it closed at plus 132, would be 8%. However, there's often, you'll hear in the sports betting community, in order to be profitable, you have to have positive closing line value the majority of time. That is incorrect and not true. Now, let's go back and look at this, analyze this again, and let me explain my point a little bit deeper. This line opened at plus 145. It closed at plus 132. So more than likely, let's talk about what happens. You have sharps like myself that have models that will play early when this line is released. They look at the plus 145 line, realize, hey, this line is incorrect. I have, maybe Texas at minus 110, et cetera, et cetera. So they play it at the plus 145. Books will move it. Books do not want to create a liability. They want to be on the sharp side. So they're going to move this line, make it more attractive for the Minnesota side. So a lot of times you'll have what you call steam in this business, which means that's the public piling on, which will often drive this number down to plus 132. However, that being said, if the line was incorrect at plus 132, which means at 132, there were enough people on the Minnesota side that said, hey, this line is off, meaning Minnesota shouldn't be 146. Oftentimes what you'll see late is you'll see the line move in the other direction, meaning it might go back up to maybe minus 153. Well, in this case, it did not. It opened at plus 145 and closed at plus 132. Now, let me show you the log for this, and I'll explain this. Now, there's going to be a link for this tracker at the end of this video, or in the description of this video. So I tracked this from 5/1 all the way up through yesterday. So we're looking at the generic opening line at bookmakersreview.com, comparing that to the closing line at Bookmaker. And the trigger point for a play would be if we had at least 10 cents of line movement in our direction for the dog at closing. And if you track this from 5/1, you can go back and audit this if you want to. And there were the two plays I mentioned from yesterday, Texas and Washington. Playing it this way, it went 46 and 41. That's 53%. This is playing all money line dogs for a net unit profit of plus 18.64 units. That totals 87 units wagered, 18.64 units gained for an ROI of 21%. Now, I want to explain why you only focus on money line dogs doing this. Notice it hit 53%, but if we're playing only money line dogs, it's extremely profitable. And I'm going to go over here and switch gears and take a look at my log for, this is the model that I use for Major League Baseball. You can see it's 144 and 134, 22.42 units. And I was tracking this is tracked since 410. So 301 units wagered total. You divide the units gained by the total units wagered. That's a 7.4% ROI, 52% win percentage. And what I've noticed about baseball, I cover this in a coaching video, why this is the case. Teams are a lot tighter this year than years past, so there's more variance. So if there's more variance, the reason I did it on the other tracker playing all dogs, it just makes it a lot easier. And when I tracked it playing the top 6 teams via the model, it actually wasn't even profitable because the market has adjusted a little bit. So if you play only the good teams, you're not going to get as much value via my model. And it was basically even. So we've expanded our model to include the top 10 teams, and also understanding that there's a lot of variance. It's going to be difficult for a model or anybody handicapping, at least in my opinion, to hit, say, 55, 56% in Major League Baseball. So with the top-down concept, it was better to just focus on money line dogs. That's not to say you can't be profitable using this for favorites. It's just that I think it's easier to do just playing and focusing on money line dogs. Now, so I want to review this whole entire model and make a couple other points. So you want to note the opening line at bookmakersreview.com for money line dogs. Then you want to check bookmakers closing line and look at that line as late as you can, because we'll tell you that sometimes, let's say there's a public line move, and I want to explain that briefly. So in that particular example, say that line opened at plus 145, it moves all the way down to plus 132. You will see this a lot in NBA. You'll see this a lot in college football with a quarterback. Quarterback play not as important in college football as it is in NFL. So sometimes a quarterback, the second string guy play, the public will overreact to that. A public line move means when the entire market knows why that line's moving. I've talked about this before. A lot of times the books will move the line anyway. It's a ghost line movement, meaning they're moving and anticipating people will overreact to this. And then what you'll see late is maybe 30 minutes before the game, you'll see people play the opposite direction. They'll play in favor of the backup quarterback because they've realized that the public has driven this line extreme to the point where there's value playing the side where the line movement is going against, if that makes sense. So that's why it's important to play this. If you're going to do this live, is to wait as late as you possibly can. And of course, the trigger point, if the line movement is at least 10 cents, it is a play, right? Now, a final point about closing line value. You will often hear, and I made this point at the beginning of this video, is that you have to have positive closing line value to be profitable in this business. That is not true. If you understand line movement and what I taught just now, you have more of a macro understanding of line movement itself. And what I mean by that, all of these plays, you can go back and look at every single one of them. The closing line is 10 cents or greater less than the opening line, which means on every single one of these plays, we have negative closing line value on every single play. Because again, we're looking at the opening line, comparing it to the closing line at Bookmaker, we have negative closing line value of at least 10 cents on every single one of these plays. So this entire model has negative closing line value, but it's hitting 53%, 18.64 units gained in a little over a month with a 21% ROI. Why is that? How is that? Again, I just showed you, because if you understand line movement and how it works and being able to identify and recognize if it's sharp movement or if it's a public line move, you'll be able to be profitable with this concept. Now, one thing to note, if you're actually going to do this, is that this is something new. I would say in past years, line movement was not as sharp. Even if you back up 2 years ago, line movement was way off. In fact, it was so off that I didn't even wager on, I didn't even look at line movement. In fact, I would play late because the market would always move against me. So it was better for me to wait. Whereas this year, the market has sharpened up. So now I play pretty early. Now, understanding that line movement, I think it's a little bit sharp this year. I'm going to take a look at, this was 2 days ago, and this is some application of this if you have a model, and I've done this as well. For example, yesterday the model had Baltimore. The line moved against us, so instead of wagering the normal amount, usually for us it's a third unit, $333 or $500, we only wagered 1/5 unit, which was $200, and of course it was a loss. Now, look at this particular example from 2 days ago. Excuse me. The early games were the Dodgers and Milwaukee. We split out, made a little bit of profit with the Dodgers. Now we got ready to play Minnesota, which was a play. Instead of wagering 1/3 unit, we wagered a half unit. Why? Because that line opened at like minus 126 and closed at minus 142. So we had zero closing line value. But I realized, hey, if this line opened at minus 126, it's closing at minus 142, and it's not moving back in the other direction, we would increase our unit size. Billy Walters talked about this in his book as well. So if he saw a line open, same concept, he would rate it as a 3-star play or a 2-star play. If the line moved in his favor, then he would increase that to a 3-star or 4-star play and actually wager more. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this video brought you a lot of value. I almost made this a coaching video. So if you're curious what it's like to be a member, have a service that's $50 a month to join. You get access to all my lines. We have about 200 coaching videos on the site. So it's only $50 a month to join, very inexpensive. So you get a ton of value simply by becoming a member. There's a link to join in the description of this video. If you want access to that, in addition to all my plays, $100 a month. The best value is joining for an entire year. Instead of paying $100 a month, you pay $500 one time. You get access to everything on the website for $500 a year. It's like getting an associate's degree in sports betting. Link to join in the description. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe to the channel. Talk to you guys soon. Peace.